So in our previous video, we looked at which DAW you should pick, and we considered a few things. And by now, you probably already picked one, or you're trying a couple out. Now you're probably wondering, how do I actually make stuff? Well, you're gonna want to start off with a little bit of music theory, which is what we're gonna cover in this video. Now we're not gonna get into some super advanced stuff. We're just going to go over the basics, and we're going to sort of try to demystify all these things. The first thing we're going to talk about is scales. So when you're first starting off, you're going to be making stuff, and your things might not exactly sound, quote, right. So instead of your music sounding like this, it might sound something like this. Now, clearly, there's something different between those two sequences that I just played for you. The difference is one of them is in a key and the other one's monochromatic, meaning it's playing all of the notes. So what is a note? So a note is a sound with a certain pitch. This pitch corresponds to a frequency. For example, the standard A4, which is the A note, which is this, and the fourth octave, that's around 440 hertz. So the higher the frequency, the higher the pitch is. The lower the frequency, the lower it is. In theory, there are only really 12 notes. So you have C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and then C again. Naturally, if you use all of these, which is called monochromatic, it's not going to sound right. If you use these in the wrong grouping, it's also going to sound weird. And we'll get into why they sound weird, but first we're going to go over what exactly is a scale. So, a scale is a sequence of notes ordered by pitch that move in step up and down. So, for example, we have the first one we're going to learn, which is C major. So you have two types of scales for the most part. You have your major scale and your minor scale. You also have modes, but we're not going to get into that. That's slightly more advanced stuff. We're going to stick to major and minor. So we have the C major scale, which sounds like this. Simply put, the C major scale is all the white keys. Now, what exactly constitutes a major scale? So when you start on the major scale, you're going to have your root note, which is C in this particular case. And the sequence for a major scale is a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Now, remember how we talked about these 12 notes? These are also called semitones. Now, a whole step is 2 semitones. So when we're starting on C, we're not going to do 1 semitone because that'd be a half step and we'd end up on C sharp. That's not what we want. What we want is a whole step, so we want 2 semitones. So instead of going to C sharp, we're going to D. Then after that, we want another 2 semitones to make another whole step, which instead of landing on D sharp, we're going to land on E. So we're going to have C, D, E. And then we have a whole step, which would land us on F. Now, sometimes you might get confused when you're first learning it this way because you'll kind of try to tell yourself, oh, a half step, that's just go to the black key that's closest, but that's not always the case, as we can see here. So that half step after the E would be F. And then we do another whole step to G, another whole step to A, then another whole step to B, and then a half step to C, which gives us the entire scale. Alternatively, we have minor scales. So this is the similar idea where we're having a sequence of whole and half steps, but for a minor scale, it shifts a little bit. So instead of doing a whole step and a whole step and then a half step, we do a whole step and then a half step. So we would then have A minor, which is its relative minor. Now these are the same notes. Okay, they're just starting differently. I didn't mention this when I was initially recording this, but you're probably wondering at this point, what is the difference between a major and a minor scale? Well, usually major scales get played upwards and minor scales get played downwards. That's not always the case, but that's a usual trend. And the common idea is that major scales sound happier and minor scales sound sadder. That has to do with the frequency ratios that we talk about further in the video. Keep in mind, these are generalizations. Some keys may be a major scale, but they'll sound a little more emotional. Some of them will be minor scales, but they'll have a certain different emotion. Pretty much each of them carries its own sort of vibe to it. So instead of starting on C, we'd be starting on A. All right. So we would do one whole step, and then a half step to C, then two whole steps, which would go to D and E, and then one half step, which would get us to F, and then two whole steps, which would get us back to the tonic. All right. So you might be wondering, what are these words that I'm using right now? What's a tonic? So in the scales, we have what are called degrees. So the first degree, which is the root note in the case of C major, is C. So that's the tonic or the home note. Then we would have the supertonic, or what's above the tonic, and that's just, the one above the tonic, which is D. And then we have the mediant, which is the third one, which is between 1 and 5. Then we have the subdominant, which is below the dominant, which we'll get to after. Then we have the dominant, which creates this sort of like tension. Then we have the submediant, which is between the fourth and the tonic. Then we have the subtonic, which leads to the tonic. And then we're back an octave higher at the tonic. Now, these are all just names for these. Essentially, they're just their position within the scale. Now, why does this matter, and why exactly is it that it even sounds good? So it all has to do with what we talked about earlier. We know that a note is a specific frequency. Now, these notes within the scale, they have a ratio between their frequencies. So, for example, the tonic, if you were to play that same note on another instrument, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. Then you'd have a 9-to-8 ratio on the supertonic, 5-to-4 on the mediant. On the subdominant, you have a 4-to-3, a 3-to-2 on the dominant, 5-to-3 on the submediant, 15-to-8 on the leading tone, and then a 2-to-1 ratio on the octave. Now, in the minor scale, you have changes in the third. So the third is actually 6-to-5, and then the sixth is 8-to-5. So in our previous video, we looked at which DAW you should pick, and we considered a few things. And by now, you probably already picked one, or you're trying a couple out. Now you're probably wondering, how do I actually make stuff? Well, you're going to want to start off with a little bit of music theory, which is what we're going to cover in this video. Now, we're not going to get into some super advanced stuff. We're just going to go over the basics, and we're going to sort of try to demystify all these things. Now, these ratios just naturally sound better. because if you have ratios that are off, it ends up sounding dissonant in relation to the other notes. Now that we know the relative minor, we're going to look at parallel minors. So we know C major, and now we're also going to look at C minor. This will kind of cement the idea of what these steps are. So, whereas in the major scale, we have a whole step, and a half step. In the minor, we would have a whole, a half, and a whole. So, this plays a role in our chords. So different chords will fit into different scales. The most basic form of a chord is a triad. So as the name implies, you have 3 notes. And that would be the root note, the third from that, and the fifth from that. And together, so as we've been looking, we've been doing the C major scale. So we have C, which is the root note here, and then we have the third, which is E, and then G, which is the fifth. And together, we have the C major chord. In the minor, we have the whole step, half step. So instead of it being a regular third, it would be, and then you get a C minor chord. So once you know your scale for a particular song, you'll be able to figure out what chords will sound good, what notes will sound good, and then you can actually compose your music. So I've actually pulled up a diagram that tells us what are the chords in C major. So naturally we have C major, we have D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and then B diminished. Now, diminished chords are a separate class of chords, and we're not going to get into all of them because I'm going to make a dedicated video, which will also expound on some of the things that we talked about in this one. But basic rundown of this, we have notes, which are specific frequencies. Then those fit into scales, which, based on different ratios of those frequencies, they, quote, sound good. And we have chords that fit within those scales that are composed of multiple notes being played simultaneously. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please leave a like, leave a comment on maybe what's your favorite scale that you like to compose in, and hit the subscribe button, and make sure you stay tuned for future videos, especially as we go into more music theory. Thanks.